Welcome to today's lecture. Today we are going to handle the unit of political sociology. The unit code is BED 3207. The facilitator for this course is Gordon Ochola. So welcome to the lecture. We are going to start with a recap on our previous lecture, and based on other platforms that we've interacted with, we've looked at definition of political sociology, and we saw that political sociology is a field of study that emerged as a result of marriage between political science and sociology. So it is a rich field that tries to expound the relationship between political field and society. Apart from that, we've also looked at the theoretical approaches to political sociology. We've also looked at the concept of power, state, and society. And we've also looked at the theories of state formation, where we looked at different theoretical explanations that tries to expound how a state is formed. Last but not least, on our previous lecture, we also looked at power and the classics of political sociology. So it is a continuation on what we have discussed. Now for today, we are going to look at a different topic, and that is social movements. Now, social movement emanates from two different words, that is society and movement. So when you talk about social movement, is the process by which a society moves from one state to another. And within this lecture, we are going to look at the following areas. We are going to look at the introduction. We are going to define what is social movement. Social movement is often confused with special interest groups. So we are also going to look at the characteristics of these two different, often confused groups. We'll also look at the typologies of social movements. Apart from that, we'll also look at the causes of social movement. What is it that can make a society to move from one social state to another? Apart from that, we are going to look at different phases of social movement, and in that context, we are going to look at the life cycle of social movement. We are also going to look at participation in social movement action. Which category of people in the society are likely to participate in a social movement? And then we'll give a conclusion, which will give a summary of what we shall have discussed today. Starting with the introduction, we want to ask ourselves, what is a social movement? And a social movement is an organized effort by a large number of people to bring about or impede social, political, economic, or cultural change. So when you talk about social movement, it is an organized effort by a large number of people to bring about or impede social, political, and economic changes. So key in understanding what social movement is, it is critical to understand that it is involving a large number of people. And apart from involving large number of people, it can bring about change, and the change it can bring about can either be the social change, political change, economic change, or cultural change. At the same time, it can impede change, and this change that it can impede or it can reverse can be the social change, political change, economic change, or cultural change. So examples of social movements that exist or that we may be well conversant with is the apartheid movement. We also have the anti-war movement, especially in war-torn countries, where you find that citizens, they gather together and they can organize a demonstration to express their dissatisfaction with a war happening in their country. You can also have anti-vaccination movement, and anti-vaccination movement, especially in this part of the world, specifically Kenya, we've had the Catholic Church giving their voice against vaccination, specifically the polio vaccine, and that can be an example of a social movement that is resisting or that is against use of polio vaccine. We also have the Black Lives Matters, and a few weeks ago, or around mid-year 2020, there was this incident of mistreatment of some black citizen in America, which brought a lot of demonstration, and that is an example of a social movement. We also have children rights movement, and these are movements that tries to agitate for the protection of the children's the rights of the young ones. We can also have the civil rights movement and conservation movements. And conservation movements are those that could be a movement that is geared towards protection of a protected forest area, protection of wildlife, and conservation movements are usually coordinated by environmental conservation groups. Now, going straight to the difference between these often confused terminologies, that is the social movement and special interest groups. Key characteristics that define social movement is that it often works outside the system by engaging various kinds of protest, including demonstration, picket line, sit-ins, and sometimes outright violence. So social movements are usually outside the system, in the sense that it is just a group of people that may feel agitated or they may feel oppressed, and then they gather themselves and then they use different means of expression to express their support or to express their their dissatisfaction, and this means can either be demonstration, picketing, sit-ins, or outright violence. Apart from that, social movements are also characterized by focusing on issue on moral and social nature as well as political. So social movements, they generally focus on issues of moral, social, or even political in nature. Another key characteristic of social movement is it emphasizes participation and inclusionary and democratic organization. In the definition, we mentioned that social movement involve large number of people, and that is what the point here is emphasizing, that it is inclusionary and emphasizes on participatory. Apart from that, social movements, they also hold critical attitude towards bureaucratic and state solutions. So in most cases, you will find that social movements, they are always big critics about existing bureaucratic systems, especially if the bureaucratic system is trying to implement change, or the bureaucratic system is trying to impede or to prevent change that the oppressed group is against. The other or less critical characteristic of social movement that differentiate it from special interest group is that the ultimate goal, form of action are not negotiable within existing political arrangements. In other words, when social movement is taking place, despite the existence of means and mechanisms through which issues can be addressed, either by reporting it to the authority, either by taking it following the legal procedure, social movement usually achieve its goal without involving existing political arrangements. Now let's look at the characteristics of special groups. And in the characteristics of the special groups, which is the reverse of the social movement, is that normally they work within systems, i.e. lobbying or political campaigns. So the special interest groups, this could be well-organized groups like non-governmental organizations that have got structures, that have got well-documented constitution on how they approach their issues, and therefore when they work with the system. So if it is an issue that the non-governmental organization feel that needs to be addressed, they would tend to use the existing political arrangements to ensure that their issues are addressed. And this can either be through lobbying or conducting campaign. So looking at this specific characteristic, special interest groups are usually very organized, and in most cases they tend not to use other means that can bring chaos if they are agitating for their issues to be dealt with. Apart from that, special interest groups have some autonomy from government or political parties, and therefore they try to influence policy. So special interest groups, being organized, their approach is to ensure that the issues of the policy are addressed within existing political arrangement. If it is an issue that they want addressed, they will always call the policy makers, they will always call maybe the parliamentarians who are supposed to pass the laws, and engage them in a formal platform. Unlike the social movement organization, that despite the existence of such mechanisms, they tend to ignore such. Even when engaging policymakers, they would want to cause chaos, they would want to cause commotion, such that by causing commotion or by causing chaos, which is a means outside the existing political arrangement, through that is how their issue could be understood. And that is the reverse of the special interest groups. Now, another characteristic of special interest group is they seek to influence government, but unlike political parties, they do not aspire to take control of it. So special interest groups, they usually target to engage government, but they are not political entities. So special interest group, they would want to engage politicians to address specific issue that could be affecting the society, either socially, politically, economically, or culturally, but they would not want to be directly involved in political leadership, and that is the formation of government. Another critical characteristic of special interest group is that they focus on influencing government. And as we've said, in focusing on influencing government, they use existing political arrangements to achieve that specific objective. Now, having looked at the difference between special interest groups and the social movements, let's move ahead and look at the typologies or the types of social movements. Now, one of the types of social movement is a reformative social movement. And this reformative social movement, as the name suggests, it agitates for reforms. And reforms here, it means going back to, as the name suggests, relooking at an issue to ensure that it is done differently. And here, a reformative social movement, they seek changes in some aspects of national, political, economic, or social systems. So, in other words, they seek reforms within the national politics, national economic environment, or national social systems. So as the name suggests, reformative social movement seek to gain or seek to influence change within the national political or social system. We also have revolutionary social movements, and revolutionary social movement here is a type of social movement that seek to promote revolution. And when you talk about revolution here, it is a complete change of every aspect of the society. A good example of a revolutionary leader that the world has had is the Fidel Castro, which was a former minister of Cuba, and he was agitating for communist system of governance within his country. So when you talk about a revolutionary social movement here, it seeks to completely change every aspect of the society. And usually revolutionary movements are mostly political, and they are driven by a radical change in the political system, and mostly involve the civil society movement as well as the political aspect of it. The other typology of social movement is the redemptive social movement. And redemptive here comes from the word redemption. And redemption got to do with religious changes. So when you talk about redemptive social movement, it deals with religious matters, and it can also be referred to as religious social movement. And it focuses on a specific segment of the population. And this can either be Christians, it can either be the Hindu community, it can either be the Muslim. So when you talk about redemptive social movement, it focuses on a specific segment of the population, and the goal is to provoke the inner changes or the spiritual growth of an individual. So redemptive social movement focuses on spiritual growth of an individual or a given group of people. And then the other typology, which is the last one, is reactionary social movement. And reactionary social movement, as the name suggests, is as a result of reaction. And reaction is an activity that is preceding another one. So reactionary social movement here is tries to block social changes or reverse social changes that have already been achieved. An example of a reactionary social movement is the anti-abortion movement. Anti-abortion movement is a contemporary example of reactionary social movement, in the sense that if maybe a government has enacted a law that is promoting abortion and some people feel agitated or some people feel wronged as a result of that, then that organization or people trying to agitate for reversal of that particular scenario, then that type of social movement can qualify to be a reactionary social movement. Having looked at the types or typologies of social movements, let's move ahead and look at the causes of social movement. And I'd begin by saying that social movements do not just occur, that you wake up one day and then you find social movement in existence. No. Social movement occur for a reason and to achieve a specific purpose. So social movement is usually a social unrest which give rise to a social movement. So there must be some social unrest or social uncomfortability for social movement to come into existence. Now, one of the major causes of social movement is the cultural drift. And cultural drift here can also be referred to as major cultural changes. So as the society undergoes constant changes, And as the society undergoes constant changes, values, behaviors usually change. And thus, the society becomes civilized. So in the course of this cultural change, most people tend to develop new ideas. So when people develop new ideas, mostly as a result of globalization or interaction with the global atmosphere or interaction with the global community, people tend to have some new ideas. And some of these new ideas could be conflicting what was previously embraced as the gospel truth existing within a community in form of culture. So when people gain new ideas, people become civilized. There is that element of people trying to abandon their cultural orientation, and that can cause social movement. And a good example of cultural drift is in some communities, especially in indigenous communities in Kenya. They have been practicing some retrogressive cultural practices, and some of these retrogressive cultural practices tend to affect other people's rights. A good example is the female genital mutilation. So as a result of social change or civilization, some of these activities that culture or specific cultures have previously embraced, they tend to be considered as being retrogressive or being against some people's rights. And therefore, a social movement can result when people become civilized and then they now look at things very differently. So cultural drift is a major cause of social movement. Apart from that, we also have social disorganization. And a changing society is to some extent disorganized, because changes in different parts of the society do not take place simultaneously. One part changes more rapidly than the other. So as a society changes, it becomes disorganized. For example, a society can change in form of being urbanized. So when a society becomes urbanized, things tend to be very different in the urban setup compared with the rural area. And that causes what we call social disorganization, where people within the urban area tend to look at things very differently from people within the rural area. And that social disorganization can cause social movement. We also have social injustice, and social injustice leads to frustration and alienation that provides fertile ground for social movement. So social injustice is also a major cause of social movement. Having looked at the causes of social movements, let's look at the social movement cycle. And social movement cycle, for this particular lecture, we borrow a lot from these two sociologists, and that is Bloomer and Tilly. And in their write-up, they have outlined that social movement life cycle involves 4 different stages. That is the emergence, the coalescence stage, institutionalization stage, and the decline stage. Starting with the first one, which is the emergence stage, which is stage 1. People realize that there is a specific problem in their society that they want to address. And the potential movement participants may be unhappy with some policy or some social conditions, but they have not yet taken any action in order to redress them. For example, you may just be unhappy with a scenario, but you don't know how to address it, but you have no platform on how to express your grievance. And therefore, A good example is you may be unhappy with a case, and then what you do is you comment it in your family. But maybe I don't like the issue of maybe the traffic jam in this particular part of in the city, and therefore we need to do something about it. Or I don't like the idea of maybe noise pollution we are experiencing within our neighborhood, and therefore you just whisper it to your family member or your friend. So that is an emergence. So what happens at the emergent stage is people just realize that there is a specific problem among them that needs to be addressed. Then the second stage is the coalescent stage, and this is the next level where people join together and organize in order to publicize the issue. So rather than the issue becoming an individual, people start talking about it together, and therefore they join together, and then they start raising awareness about it. And the social movement does develop a plan of action, recruit members, hold protest marches, form networks, and get resources. Apart from that, the movement also becomes more than just random, discontented individuals at this point, and they now organize and strategize on their outlook. So at this stage, it is now not an individual affair, but people start talking about it together, and people start thinking about how it can be addressed. The next stage is the institutionalization stage, and in the institutionalization stage, it can also be referred to as the bureaucratization or formalization. And this is where the social movement, rather than being just an organization that has got no structure or institution is created with different levels of responsibilities and power. Staffs are recruited who are professionals on how to handle that are supposed to handle different issues within the organization. And in this phase, political power is greater for the social movement than in the previous stages. And it may have more regular access to political elites. So the social movement at this level, if it has reached this level, then it can have formal engagement with political elites. Last but not least is the fourth stage, which is the decline stage. When you talk about decline stage, it is not that the social movement has failed. The word decline here means that social movement is progressing to the next level. And it can progress to the next level either through repression, co-option, success, failure, or establishment with the mainstream. So when you talk about decline, it does not necessarily mean that social movement has failed, but it has progressed to the next level, either because the issue they were agitating for has been tackled, or the issue that they were addressing has been passed by time. A good example in this country was the multi-party movement that we had in the early 90s. Now, we had multi-party movement, we had multi-party demonstrations, we had multi-party organizations that were fighting for multi-party system to be adopted in Kenya. Now, once multi-party has been achieved, then these social movements' lifespan, they either end or they start doing other things. And that is what we mean when we talk about the decline stage in stage 4 of the social movement life cycle. So, of critical here is that people fall away or adopt a new movement, and the movement successfully brings about change it sought, or where people no longer take the issue seriously. So it can reach a point when people also stop taking the issue seriously, and therefore the social movement just disappears naturally. whatever we have discussed in the life cycle of social movement can be explained using a diagram where it starts with emergence, go to coalescence, go to the bureaucratic stage, and the bureaucratic stage here, or institutionalization here, it can either result into success, failure, co-option, repression, or go mainstream. But then all these stages, at the end of all these stages, or different means of decline, all this refers to different levels of decline. And as I've said, these stages we are talking about have been adopted from Bloomer and Tilly. Before we conclude, we need to ask ourselves, in this social movement we are talking about, who is likely to be an active participant? Actually, social movement, when it's taking place, not everybody usually participates. There are people who sit in the office. There are people who, even if they don't know what people are demonstrating about, you'll always find them on the road. And there are people who, even if they are the ones who are seriously affected, they would not actively participate in social movement. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, who is likely to be an active participant in a social movement action? One of the major participants is the mobile and have little chances to become integrated in the life of the community. So people who have lesser chances of being integrated in the community, it means they are facing some level of deprivation. So this group of people, when they feel deprived, they are likely to be the most people in the front line in social movement. Actually, a question you can ask yourself is, wherever we have demonstration, especially in developing countries like Kenya here, you will find that the active participants in that process are usually people from the slum area. Why don't we have people from leafy suburbs actively participating in demonstrations, actively participating in social movements? It is because most likely they don't fall in this category. So they have, based on their socioeconomic status, they have higher chances of being integrated in the life in the community. Another group is those who are not fully accepted or integrated in the group and are termed as the marginal. So people who are not the marginalized community or the marginalized group of people are also likely to be active participants in social movement. And the reason as to why they are likely to be active participants in social movement is because of this marginalization. The fact that they are marginalized, what makes them to be marginalized is enough reason to make them participate actively in social movement. And then we also have the isolated community, which can also be marginalized or they are not integrated in the community. And then another group of people is those who are threatened by economic insecurity. And this is where we have the poor people. So the poor people, due to their threatened socioeconomic security, they're usually active participants when it comes to social movement. Another one is those who are free from family responsibilities and are estranged from their families. So people who are free, it depends with your level of freeness, in the sense that if you have family responsibility where you commit yourself into taking care of your responsibility, or you are held up trying to fend for your family, then you may not have time to engage yourself in social movements. Last but not least are the maladjusted group of people. And maladjustment here implies to inability to cope with the demand for normal social movement. So people with some inadequacies in the society, are what we refer to as the maladjusted people, and they have inability to cope with the demand of normal social movements. So this is also a critical group of people who are likely to be actively involved in social movement. So looking at this group of people who are likely to be active participants in the social movement action, it is very critical that these people are either deprived economically, socially, politically, or culturally. So deprivation in those four specific systems is enough reason for one to be an active participant in social movement. But there are also some people who may not be falling within this specific category, but due to their urge or due to their concerns of wanting to ensure that things are done in the right way, you will find them also being actively participating in social movement action. Having looked at that, we will go to the conclusion, and in the conclusion I'll say that political outcomes of social movements extend beyond the realm of policy, and that non-institutional outcomes, particularly changes in political concerns, are important form of political change. So social movements, it is true, they can result into policy change and even in non-institutional outcomes. But at the same time, the social movement, their critical result that is rarely talked about is that they can also influence people's political concerns, which is also a very important change. It is also a very, very important change. And this conclusion, I've borrowed it from Bide 2015, who is a very well-published political sociologist. Otherwise, thank you, and that is the end of our lesson 1.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.